Hello, everyone. Hello. Again, I am Angel Byrd, and I'm an Ethnic Skin Fellow in the Department of Dermatology at Johns Hopkins. And I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to discuss the work that's been done in the direction of Dr. Janetta Coe, entailing from the bank to the bedside, an establishment of a fresh tissue bank for hidradenitis suppurativa. So I have nothing to disclose. I will say that Valiant Pharmaceuticals, they do fund the Ethnic Skin Fellowship, but there's nothing as it relates to the research that I'll be presenting today. As far as the learning objectives, I will not go into explaining HS. Of course, for this group, everybody's done a wonderful job of that. I do want to spend some time just explaining and understanding the process of how we were able to establish the fresh tissue bank, which is an ongoing process, and then some of the basic science approaches that we have applied to the actual tissue bank. And a lot of you have done it as well, so it's very exciting to see that we're all speaking this similar language. A brief outline of the talk. Like I said, I won't go into explaining HS, but I will go through the process of how we were able to establish the bank at Hopkins. A few experimental approaches. I'll give you a few examples with methods and results, just a few, and then conclusions, and then future directions. Now, I won't go through this, but I would like to call your attention to, in terms of the demographics, that the predominance is in African-American females. And this has come up a lot today, that this population is the population that's affected. But oftentimes in the literature, this is not the population that's represented. So I do want you to keep that in mind, because we're trying our best at Hopkins to make sure that this population is represented. So I won't go through the proposed mechanisms. Again, I think as colleagues, you've done a wonderful job. But I will say that the underlying theme seems to be this progressive and recurrent inflammation. And in order to get in there and ask the hard questions, the basic science questions, we need the tissues, we need the lesions, we need the serum, we need the blood. And so this was the idea that we had when I went to Hopkins with Dr. Okoye. So I just want to spend a little bit of time just telling you how we've been able to establish our bank and what we have in our bank thus far. So what we do in this whole concept of bank to bedside, we collaborate with the surgeons at Hopkins under our approved IRB protocol, because as you know, early stage 2 and 3, there's nothing therapeutically that we can do for these patients. We have to send them to the OR. So that's where I go to the OR and I take that tissue back to the bench. So once this tissue is surgically resected, we snap freeze it in the OR. We then have a piece for OCT, that's for cryostat sectioning, where we will do things like IHC and IF. We also have a piece where we will do for RNA, where we'll analyze for DNA, for qPCR, via qPCR, ELISA, Western blots. And we also have a section for paraffin. Now, it's interesting because you can also do the same analysis with the OCT section, but when you do paraffin blocks, it gives you more of your structural basis. So you're able to actually look at the cells and see them very clearly in your sections. And this is just an example. As you can see, the top here is a fresh frozen, where you can clearly see that there's a hyperkeratotic epidermis here, and you can see that there's an inflammatory infiltration, but I think you can appreciate even more so on this paraffin section, you're actually able to see the cells that are infiltrated in the tissue lesions. So that's why we always do a section for the paraffin as well. We also take a piece and we put in special media for culture media, and we culture cells such as fibroblasts and keratinocytes. So Dr. Robertson, I was listening to your talk, and we have those HS keratinocytes as well. And then we apply functional analyses. And so the remainder is stored at -80 for future studies or whatever our minds can think of. It's there for our analysis. So just to give you a few pointers, because along the way we also learned some things. When we first started, because you know these pieces of tissues are massive, we were taking that piece of tissue back to the bench and trying to section it out as we wanted, and that was just not working. So now what we do, we go into the OR with a plan, and we section off the tissues while we're there. So the tissue sections that I just mentioned, we section them off in the OR, and it's been very beneficial to do that. And then when you have different biospecimen, like I mentioned, you can form collaborations, and you're able to, collaborate with a friend who might want to look at the keratinocytes or the fibroblasts. So that's been a great opportunity as well for us. So also, when you think about HS, that's the actual localized lesion, right? But a lot of you have talked about the systemic effects. So how have we approached that in terms of our bank? So what we do is when the patients come in for a routine visit on another IRB-approved protocol, we draw their blood. We're able to look at things such as their neutrophils and their monocytes, and we can do functional analyses of that as well. We can also get their serum. We can look for disease biomarkers. And like I said, we're able to form a lot of different collaborations. I will not go into every one of them, but it has been nice just being able to really use the bank in that sense to form the different collaborations. So this is just an example of our cohort that we have. This is not the entire cohort, but I just wanted to put just an example for you to see what we have so far. And it's so interesting, as you can see here, that although, the surgeons call us, when the surgeons call, we go. But it's so amazing that with the cohort that we see, we're representing that African-American female population that is really being affected by the disease, unfortunately. I did my medical and graduate school training at Providence, Rhode Island at Brown, and I honestly did not see HS. That's because I didn't see many African-American patients, but when I went to Hopkins, that's when the disease was rampant, and it's before my eyes, like daily. So that's been an interesting thing for me to really see, like before my eyes, to see the population being represented. This is just an example of the actual tissue. This is a tissue that we have from the OR, and this is it actually have been sectioned off. We put it into OCT, and then this is it on the cryostat right before I'm getting ready to section it onto slides. So this is just an example of what you can do once you actually get the tissues on slide. You can stain for different things, and then you can use fluorescent microscopy to see things such as anti-MPO, to say increased inflammation, and then you can quantify that. And then you could ask things like, are the more chronic lesions of HS, like early stage 3, where you have more cellular infiltration correlating with the disease severity, as a lot of you have explained today in your work. This is just an example, again, if you can see the increased infiltration surrounding your hair follicle here. And then this is anti-MPO in the green. And you can see here we also started staining for a few keratinocytes. So the point is just once you have the tissue, once you have the bank, the questions are endless. And we can start really asking these challenging questions to hopefully help these patients. So this is another example when I was explaining the actual cells, when we isolated the cells. These are your fibroblasts, your neutrophils, your macrophage monocytes, and you're actually able to culture these cells. So you could do co-culture experiments, and then you could do readouts such as ELISAs or qPCR, or you can look for cytokine production and start asking the question to see the crosstalk between the cells. So that's what we're hoping to do as well. And a lot of you, like I said, I'm giving you your props. You've already started thinking about the feedback manner of how these cells are actually talking to each other, leading to the diseases that we are seeing clinically. So this is just an example of another paraffin section where you can actually see that there's your macrophage, there's your neutrophil. So they're there in close proximity in the tissue. So it's begging us to ask, how are these cells communicating with each other? How are they leading to this very horrible disease that we're seeing clinically? And this is just another stain where we're actually showing the neutrophil and the macrophage in close proximity in the tissue as well. These are monocytes that we've cultured and differentiated into macrophages also. So this is just another example, just layering on again. This is the HS skin fibroblast that we've grown up, and then you can see here that we could put it in context with other cells. Same here, you could put it in context with, choose your cell of interest, and then you can start doing different co-culture experiments and doing functional analyses. So that's just an example of, a very minor example of what you can do once you actually have the bank and have the biospecimens. So this is just an example that wanted to put in just a little bit of the data, but you could clearly see that, go back one, You can clearly see that here, where you have the HS fibroblasts and we're doing your readout for IL-6, you don't see an increase in IL-6 until we start varying the different stimuli and the different cell culture experiments with the co-culture. So this is something that we're actively doing and trying to ask those particular questions, as you all are asking as well. So the take-home messages and the conclusions, basically it's just studying the role of chronic inflammation provides an insight in understanding this complex disease of HS. As we all know, we all study it, it's a very daunting disease, and the patients really are begging for us to hopefully figure something out to help them. And so with this particular approach of getting this biobank, or just really banking the tissue, banking the serum, you're able to actually do translational medicine. That's an aspect of dermatology that I've truly fallen in love with. It's truly translational. We're able to go from the bedside to the bench to the bank, and then hopefully, ultimately, we want to go back to the bedside and help these patients who are really suffering from this particular disease. And of course, in derm, you could do this with a number of diseases, so that's the beauty of it. So you can mimic it in other diseases that are also that patients are suffering from. So future directions for us, of course, a lot of you, again, have alluded to this whole personalized approach to HS, where perhaps we could look at an active flare or a disease that's pretty quiescent, and then we're able to then look at it pre and post treatment and try to really get an understanding of that particular person's disease and tailor the treatment for that particular person. And like I keep saying, just to optimize the therapy for the patients who are suffering from this debilitating disease. So with that, there are a lot of people who are helping. I won't go into all of the names. I definitely have to acknowledge Dr. Janetta Coe, my fearless leader, Dr. Mariana Kaplan and Carmela Romana Rivera, who is at NIH, who helps us tremendously. And of course, the surgeons who give us the tissues to actually bank. And also, we have to thank the patients, right? Because they're so hopeless, but yet they're so hopeful that we're going to help them. And so I always just have to thank them as well. And thank you for having me today. And I will just end by saying, just like you trust your money with the bank, you can trust your tissue with us. If you have patients you want to send to us to add to our bank, or even vice versa, if you are doing studies and you do not have a representation of that African American population, we would love to collaborate in some way, whatever is necessary to actually help these particular patients. Thank you.